Hi friends, this is John. Welcome to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, where we have all kinds of fun conversations. We all benefit from reminders. We benefit from being reminded of important things that we would have otherwise forgotten. And what I find so intriguing is that I enjoy these conversations so much, and yet I go back and read transcripts and listen to recordings and say, oh wow, I forgot we talked about that. And so here's a highlight review of some of the highlight moments in conversations from this last year. First up, we have Rick Clark, a conversation that I had with Rick. Rick scarcely needs an introduction. For those of you not familiar with Rick's story, he's a fifth-generation farmer from Indiana who is no-till organic on a 7,000-acre scale and is very successful at that scale by many measures. And Rick and I had a fascinating conversation reviewing and discussing what we learned from a field day on Rick's farm with Christine Jones present. It was a really enlightening and extraordinary day.
The one that really stuck in my mind, there's several, like you said, but when Dr. Jones was talking about if you have two plants that are within proximity of each other and they are from different species groups, and one has a characteristic of microbes that the other one doesn't have, they have the ability to share those microbes back and forth. That was just too much for me to almost comprehend, and that really stuck with me. And then when you think about what she's saying there, it makes total sense that diversity is key, and diversity is key for so many reasons that we don't even understand yet. And that's why I could see that in our fields, and we can go anywhere you want on this conversation, but I could plainly see from being in our fields that I thought I was doing fairly well with diversity, and I've got so much more to do.
Well, building on the point that you just mentioned, and we also can bring up James White and Walter Goldstein's work on transferring microbes from one plant to another. The key piece is that these various plants can share organisms with each other, but that sharing is accelerated in stressed conditions, in stressed environments. That when you have optimal environments, then there isn't really any need to share, and they stay somewhat more self-contained, that there is less sharing going on when there isn't the need for that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. When that stress event triggers a reaction from one or more of those species, they all can partake and share. That's just unbelievable to me. But it makes sense when you really stop and think about it. But it was great to have those folks on our farm and actually out in the field, because I want people to see what we're trying to do here. I mean, John, what we're trying to do is extremely difficult. No-till, organic. I'm not thoroughly convinced that I need to maintain this purest trajectory that I'm on. I think we need to figure out how to incorporate tillage at the right times, the correct times. And all that came to light when this group was together, because Christine was very, very clear about that. But he said, if you are going to perform a tillage event, you have to immediately follow up with the cover crop of multiple species.
Yeah, let's talk about this, because this this was another one of the golden gems of the day, and that was Christine's perspective on tillage versus herbicides. And this is this recurring conversation that people are like, which is the lesser of the two evils, and how do we pick between the two? And the evils that are associated with tillage are the destruction of soil aggregation and the destruction of the soil microbiome. And on those two topics, she had a very interesting perspective. And again, this is environment and context dependent. I'm sure there are regions and areas where we have certain soil structures and wind erosion, water erosion susceptibility that we have to be very careful with. But she was very clear that herbicides cause greater loss of soil aggregation and soil structure than tillage does in most situations. There was like no question, no reservations. That was very clear in her mind that tillage was preferable to using herbicides. But then when talking about tillage, one of the questions that came up in conversation was, and this is a recurring question that I get asked all the time, is what happens with mycorrhizal fungi? Don't you disturb and destruct your soil mycorrhizal fungal population when you do a tillage event? And her reaction to that was quite interesting. Her response was, if you only till the top 6 inches of soil, there is a reserve of the soil microbial population of mycorrhiza below that. But in addition, you fracture up all of this fungal hyphae in the top 6 inches, and those hyphal strands that remain actually colonize the next generation of seeds faster than spores do, and that you do not lose any of your soil mycorrhizal fungal population as long as you immediately replant. She just rehammered that when you till, you have to immediately replant and get seeds and roots going back into that environment.
And the other thing too that, John, that I remember from that conversation was, and she even we had a whiteboard up there and she was drawing a few things, and she described that where this plant was and its surrounding area is its own microbial biome, that if you pull that plant out and put another plant in its place, some of that most of that microbial biome will stay in place and reassociate with the plant that you just put back in the ground. This, to me, I've not thought about it like this. Have you thought about it like this?
And the next piece that she said, Rick, that really caught my attention was that effect will last over winter.
Yeah.
Did you catch that?
Yes.
This effect will last over winter. So we've had this perspective that if we want to have overwintering cover crops and a healthy microbiome the following spring to plant seeds into the spring, then we need overwintering cover crops. But what she was pointing out is that you can plant cover crops that winter kill, and the microbiome that is associated with those plants when they die is still present in the soil, and that it will slowly degrade over time. In the summer months, I'm sure if you have other growing plants, then it will degrade more rapidly when you have abundant moisture. When I say degrade, the microbiome will shift to a different population. Right. But in the springtime, when the soil is cold over winter and you plant the following spring, you still have the microbiome present from that cover crop that winter killed. Next up, we have Erin Martin from FreshRX in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Erin is one of a growing group of people. She's a leader in the space, taking the concept of food as medicine and translating it into actual effective practice and developing the data around what is the human health benefit and what is the value to our overall healthcare system and our overall government and policy system. What is the monetary value of food as medicine? And it's significant. How are you incorporating that perspective of nutritional integrity into the produce that you're providing?
That's such a great question, John, and it's become like my favorite question. And so I'll tell you a little bit of a backstory about this because it's really fun. There was a community committee that was kind of putting this program together. And originally, the doctor who wanted to do this program, he said, "Oh, we'll just source from Walmart or Amazon." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a second." I said, if you want me, so they wanted me to fundraise for the program and execute it and staff it and like carry the torch, right? And I said, if you want me to do all that, I'm going to source only local and regeneratively grown produce. And the committee was like, good luck. Like, there's no way that you're going to be able to do that. And there's no way you're going to, number one, do it at scale. And number two, you're not going to be able to do it year round. And I said, okay, I like a challenge. I love when people say I can't do something because I'm like, all right, watch me. So when I started by finding the farmers and talking to them about their practices and visiting their farms. And slowly over a few months, I built a small cohort of growers that really cared. They actually, many of them, surprisingly, which is not average, they were younger farmers who had quit their corporate jobs and said, no more. Like, we care about the health of our families. We understand these practices are better. We're done with this. We want to grow our own food. And we also want to be farmers and sell it to the community. And so I was able to find some really extraordinary growers. I started at the farmers market and I would interrogate all the farmers to see what practices they were using. And a lot of them may not have identified as regenerative farmers, but they certainly were using regenerative practices, or at least on the spectrum of those practices. And so we definitely don't work with farmers or source if they're using pesticides or herbicides. They're using very little to no-till practices. Many are incorporating cover crops. Some aren't incorporating livestock integration. And so now I've built a cohort. We've served 27 small-scale farmers that are using regenerative practices. We source directly from those farmers. We pay the price they want. It's a little bit cheaper than farmers market rate, but it's not cheap. We want to pay for the quality, and we want them to kind of dictate their pricing. And so we have really seen them grow economically from sourcing from them. When we first started with those 52 patients, I just had to buy everything they had available. And now I'm having to keep up with them. So now they've grown so much that we need to enroll more people so we can keep up with the quantity that the farmers have available. And we've seen the farmers increase their growing areas dramatically by being stimulated through this program. We've estimated about a 1.5 million investment in local economics through purchasing locally through our program. And we've also helped farmers get funded for things through the USDA and the NRCS, like high tunnels, to extend their seasons. So we have provided food to 150 people twice a week. And then before that, when we had less participants, we've provided food year round since July of 2021, and we've never stopped. And like I said, now we have more produce than we can handle, and we've got to scale our program side so we can buy more from the farmers.
Dr. James White's work establishes the foundation for a very different type of agronomy, an agronomy that is focused on biology rather than on chemistry.
I agree that the bacteria are the most critical. So feeding the bacteria is a really good idea. That's the best way, actually, is to feed those bacteria. Increase the bacteria, you increase plant growth, then you will follow with the fungal growth also will be increased. But I want to say before, okay, so I agree with that strategy. But I want to say there is a way to look at why this ratio is important, right? I mean, if you consider the components of the soil, the microbes in the soil, consider the fungi, right, and the bacteria. And you can consider other groups too. They all have their own functions, right? They all have their own ways of working. A fungus has a mycelium that goes down into the soil, that goes around and colonizes plant material, secrete enzymes onto it to break it down. The bacteria can benefit in that because they can get some of those nutrients that the fungi are releasing, right? So what happens is you have these different components of the soil microbial community. One, the bacteria that benefit the plant directly in rhizophagy cycle and being absorbed into plants and moved throughout the plants. The other one that then will help break down organic material in the soil, and that as it works, then these bacteria can then get some of those nutrients and move them back to the plant, right? So you have a healthier system with the fungi and bacteria together, right? And if you take one out of the system, you take one out, it's a little less healthier if you only have bacteria there, but you're still probably going to have some fungi there, and you can build them up if you focus on that, putting organic material into the soil and so forth. So my point is that the most efficient operation is going to be the most efficient nutrient absorption is going to be happening, or nutrient production in the soil and acquisition by the plant is going to be happening when there's both fungi and there's bacteria. And as that ratio changes, there's going to be an optimum ratio, right? The most efficient for the most amount of nutrients, right? So that would be the optimum. But that doesn't mean that if it's not optimum, it's also not going to be good. If you have good bacteria there, it's going to work. And you can easily build up your fungal populations, like you said.
Well, I have this other suspicion. I won't even call it a hypothesis, but a couple of observations that have raised question marks in my mind is, I wonder if when the microbial population becomes rich enough, and there's this incredible microbial fertility in the soil, whether the ratio conversation becomes a lot less relevant. In other words, you have such a vigorous total population that the exact ratio it's not the most important factor to consider anymore.
I think it's not. I think the whole question comes back to efficiency and nutrient absorption, right? Nutrient acquisition from the soil. And so if you've got lots of microbes there, it's probably going to be highly efficient, super efficient.
Amy Williams has been a leader in the fashion industry and the apparel space by championing regenerative cotton. What I so greatly appreciate about the work she is doing with Citizens of Humanity is the authentic and deep direct relationships and the symbiotic and collaborative relationships that they're developing directly with growers and farmers. In this regard, their enterprise is a shining beacon and an example of what other enterprises and other CPG companies should aspire to engage with deep relationships with farmers and regenerate the very foundations of our supply chains. So when you think about 50 to 70% of the cotton in the U.S. eventually being demanded as under with a regenerative verification, what is the timeline for that? What's a reasonable timeline for that in your mind? And what are the barriers that need to be overcome to make that a reality?
I would say it's probably, so given that the major brands like, Lululemon, who we've spoken to, and the Gap, given that their supply chains are 2 years out, right? They're planning and strategizing that far in advance. I would say it's a 3 to 5 year, 5 years, for the percent that I talked about, but I think it's a 3 to 5 year transition. I think if there are goals that can be set, certifications in place, there's a group of farmers that are part of a collective, more at the same time we work on a brand collective, and then we continue to the number of mills that are interested in making the change. Mills are the buyers of cotton right now, right? Brands don't purchase cotton or do forecasts of cotton. We are, and those that are choosing to partner with us in this project, like Faraday, they're doing the same thing. But the mill is the primarily decision maker. So one of the important things is to continue to look at a list of leading mills around the world that are purchasing cotton out of the U.S. and saying to them, let me show you this alternative. Let me tell you why it's important, and let me give you a steady stream of people who can supply it for you. So the mill piece of it, I think, is critical to making that transition and that happen as well. Carrabbo is a great example of a mill partner who was very quick to adopt this for our products. They have brought in other brands, and they are looking to us to say, here's how much we can supply to you, not just for us, but that you can use. And so you can go out and tell all your customers from Everlane, who they're talking to, and who they work with, to others, that this is available on a regular basis.
When I think about, we're entering the 2024 growing season. And when I think about a 5-year time horizon, let's be generous and call it 6 and give it the convenient date of 2030. When I think about 50% of U.S. cotton being in a regenerative system by 2030, that's not an unreasonable ask. I think certainly with the premiums being associated with that and the way that you've been rewarding the growers you've been working with, I think there will be tremendous appetite for that. But there is also just the purely logistical and execution piece of how do you execute on scale. This is my perception, having had some exposure to the space, is there are a lot of questions about how to transition effectively. How do you grow regeneratively verified cotton? And so given the context that our podcast listeners are primarily farmers and agronomists, what's the pathway to executing on scale on the farm side?
I think that's realistically, that's a better question answered by someone like James Johnson, who's been at this for years, right? And who has made an early commitment to change. I know he's worked with AEA for a long time. We were lucky to be introduced to him, and he's been part of different bodies and groups. He's traveled around the world and worked with mills in a range of locations. I think that's a better question answered by someone like him and other farmers who are on the ground and have made the forefront. I think to your point, right, when I say that the 50% number, I'm looking at it as a brand from the demand side. Like, I believe that we can generate that sort of demand in and before that time period based on the steps that we're putting in place. Certification, proven quality of product. We have a significant percent of our collections for Citizens and A Goldie. I'm looking at the corner of my calendar because I can't even remember what year it is, let alone what month, shipping in February. We have retail partners from Net-a-Porter to Nordstrom's to some of the local specialty stores excited about this transition to regenerative cotton and having the products on their floor for consumers. So we have a wide spread sort of communication and education plan programmed. So I'm talking about the demand from the brand side, but I think if simultaneously folks like James and Callie Noland and other regenerative farmers can show the path that they took, the things, as you said earlier, that didn't work, the stumbling blocks and how we can address those. And then we work in the middle to generate more interest with mills who are purchasing cotton, then I think that's when within that 6-year time frame, we could see significant transformation in our industry, but we've got to hit it from all three sides.
Keith Berns is the co-founder of Green Cover Seeds, and we have enjoyed a growing collaboration and relationship with them with our work at Advancing Eco-Agriculture. They have been the pioneers of translating the work of Christine Jones and many other pioneers in the cover cropping space into practical application and into practical management and cultural management practices on scale. When we think about cover crop diversity and the benefits of having different types of plants in a system, how do we actually make that work? How do we make it work effectively and be cost effective and deliver good results? Keith and his team are at the forefront of working on that, figuring those pieces out, and supporting their customers through that process. We're not talking about moving 20 pounds or 50 pounds of calcium from down in the B horizon up to the soil surface. We're talking hundreds of pounds per acre, sometimes as much as 300 to 400. And that's just calcium. It's also true of all the other elements as well.
Yeah, for sure. And if you were to really, run that through your calculator, that's a lot of dollars worth of fertility that you don't have to put on if you can cycle that. And some crops, like buckwheat, for example, not only is it moving it around, but it's changing the form. So buckwheat roots, have some unique acids that they exude, and they're able to convert phosphorus that's not available to most plants, but they're converting it, they're using it, and then when that plant dies, not only is there more phosphorus now available, but it's in a form that other plants now can use. So, it's exciting to think about that. And then when you compare that then, or when you combine that then with the biology that they're bringing along with them, and again, this is one of the things that just blew me away that Dr. Jones told us is that, a single seed can have up to, what did she say, 7 or 8 billion microbes in and on that seed. So they're bringing their own microbes to the party. Especially when it's seeds grown in a regenerative environment. And I know, you and I had a webinar on, regeneratively grown seed and why that's important. But when they come with the right microbe package, then what they do, they can do it much better, much quicker, and much more efficiently.
Marty Travis has built a thriving community of small-scale market gardeners and also some not-so-small-scale gardeners in Illinois, where they are supplying exceptional quality food to restaurants in Chicago and to local families. And Marty is an inspiration to encourage us to think about what is possible. It's fascinating that with the model that he has developed, we have small-scale farms that might be making more of an income on 2 or 3 acres of land, or even less, than some farms are making on 1,000 acres.
$1.50 to $1.75 a pound, so roughly about $90 a bushel.
And that, my friends, is the difference between selling product per pound and selling it per ton.
Yes. And that has been game-changing. We don't have to, we don't have to grow 1,000 acres of wheat. We only need I don't know, 15, 20 acres of wheat and rye and some corn. One variety of our corn that we've kind of brought back from near extinction, it sounds like, is this Iroquois white corn. I basically had to do a reduction in our price because the chef offered more than what I thought it was worth. He was willing to pay $20 a pound for this roasted white cornmeal. And I said, we would probably get beat up really hard by our neighbor conventional farmers if they realized that we were making, over $1,000 a bushel on our corn. And so we settled at $15 a pound for it. And we only need to grow like an acre or 2 acres of it to make bank for the year. So
that's incredible.
There's a lot of that. And so now we're kind of streamlining things. We're putting in an 8-acre orchard with peaches, apricots, nectarines, plums, apples, pears. We want to do some brambles in there, figs if we can pull that off. Will still does the grains. We have a wild harvested pawpaws, but also a plantation that we've put in that's producing really well. In the last year, we did a lot of brassica crops, cabbages, Brussels, broccoli, kale, along with, we plant a lot of squash and sell squash blossoms at 50 cents a piece. I don't really particularly care if we end up harvesting squash off of it. That's bonus if we do. But if we can have squash blossoms, we could sell as many as 3,000 blossoms a week. And it's quick. You harvest them a couple mornings before Wednesday at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning for an hour. And you can create a lot of revenue during the summer months for that. So we've really done some of the more challenging crops and kept those for ourselves. But it's been good. It's been a way that we can make small plots, as much as, I think Will's probably on 35 acres in the south field and 8 acres of orchard. There's a 50-acre field across the road that he's doing some more conventional organic food grade crops. But the vegetable side is between 5 and 10 acres.
This whole conversation about the price point for grains and growing squash blossoms, which is something that we did on the farm that I grew up on as well, was harvesting squash blossoms. What is striking to me about this conversation is, in some ways, Marty, you remind me of kind of my outlook on life. I have a different strengths pattern than what you describe, but I'm always I travel the countryside and I look at what is happening in rural landscapes and look at what is happening in cities. And to me, there is I see this overwhelming opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's just, the land is awash with opportunity. There are no boundaries. It's your imagination is the limit. It's not accurate to say that the sky is the limit. The sky is not the limit. It's your imagination that is the limit. You are the limit. I've really come, and then I can travel the exact same pathways and with other people who have a different mind. They're different individuals. They have different history, and they don't see the opportunity. They don't see what I see. They don't see the potential that exists. And so I'm delighted to be having this conversation with you, because not only have you been able to see the opportunity, but also to manifest it and to turn it into reality in your own, in the pathway that you've been on. And so I'd love to ask the question for young people, or not just necessarily young people, but for starting farmers, even for established farmers, for people who have an interest and going down the pathway that you're describing, who are not located in Illinois or not in your geographic region, what advice would you have for them to identify and to develop these opportunities that exist?
One, I feel like it begins with some introspection. Who do you want to be? Determines what you're going to do. What financial program, what do you need this experience to become? What's the goal? What's the dream? If it's just, I need to make some extra money on the side in the summertime with the kids are home, or I want to get to a point where this becomes my foundational income. I want to do something with my partner, or you have some definition that needs to happen first. Then, before you plant a single thing, we need to identify, where does it go?
Lana Shaw is a research manager dedicated to discovering practical solutions for farming, particularly focusing on intercropping and sustainable cropping systems on the Canadian prairies. And her work holds a lot of promise and points in the direction of relay cropping and intercropping opportunities for many other crop types as well. What have been the significant successes? What are the things that you have been able to study that you were able to identify as being successful that were then adopted by growers in the region?
One of the big ones has been chickpea flax. Now, it's not really broadly grown as a combination yet, but it's being more accepted as a reasonable method for growing chickpeas. Chickpeas are very susceptible to disease, ascochyta, and growing the chickpeas with the flax has reliably over years, and I've been doing this since 2012, reliably shown a reduction in disease, and we get a good stable yield. So there's not a yield reduction per se. Sometimes there's a yield increase, but there's a reduction in disease. So it makes the disease pressure less. It improves the maturity or reduces frost risk of those chickpeas in our cold region and improves the quality of the chickpeas. So there's so many benefits to that combination that I'll be surprised if that's not the dominant method of growing chickpeas within 10 years. It's grown commercially, but it's not as though 90% of the farmers are doing it. It is established commercially, though.
Can you tell us a little bit about what this system looked like? What does planting spacing look like and relative seeding density now that you're planting both of them together? And ultimately, I think one of the big questions that is really going to drive farmer adoption is, what do the economics look like?
That's getting in the weeds some, for sure. It's some farmers like the alternating rows. And when I say getting in the weeds, it's unsettled what the best way of doing it is. So some people like alternating rows. I prefer mixed rows. I've seen really good results out of mixed rows where we have chickpeas planted a little deeper than the flax using a double shoot, either a disc drill or a hoe drill. So we're getting them almost right side by side. The seeding rate of the flax is about 10 to 15 pounds an acre, which is maybe a quarter or less than a quarter of a normal flax rate. And then the chickpea rates are fairly close to a normal chickpea density, which is about 3 to 4 per square foot. So we were doing 10-inch row spacings. So the chickpeas and flax are right beside each other, and the rows are 10-inch row spacing. That's what we were doing for quite a lot of years in trials. We also tried alternating rows so that each chickpea row would be 20 centimeters. Now, in theory, maybe those wider rows would reduce disease, but in 2022, we're not seeing a reduction in disease from those wide row spacings. It looked better in the mixed rows. And we have not yet solved the mystery of why this is reducing disease. What's the mechanism? We have sensors out there measuring temperature and humidity in the canopy, and it doesn't match with humidity. You'd think we would be seeing less disease where the humidity is lower. That's not really what we're not getting those things to correlate, really. So there's something else going on. It could still be about the dispersal of the spores, or somehow it's changing the structure of the plant enough that it's less susceptible somehow. We were just out there doing meetings last week, and I don't know how it's turned out because I haven't done the analysis on those plants yet, or on that trial yet. But it's an ongoing experiment.
You anticipated what my next question was going to be, which is, do you have any speculations on the cause of the disease resistance? But some of the things that we're learning with Dr. James White's work and some of his colleagues' work is that in a number of cases where we have these companion plants that generate disease resistance, it's actually an exchange of microbiome where perhaps the microorganisms from flax are colonizing the chickpeas and becoming associated endophytes, colonizing the entire structure and producing disease resistance. There still remain among us farmers who remember what it used to be like to farm and grow crops before the widespread, intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides. One of the fascinating conversations I had this year was with Benny McLean from Uncle Matt's Organics Citrus in Florida, where he described some of the history and the trajectory of what it used to be like in citrus production 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and how it is different today.
I'll fast forward to when glyphosate was first introduced. And I had a caretaking company here in Clearmont. So we did a lot of contract herbicide. And herbicide was not popular at that time. Most of the groves up here in Lake County, which there was about 300,000 acres of bearing citrus right up here in Central Florida. Once it became popular, we did contract herbicide. And anyway, my dad called me up one morning. He said, "Hey, didn't y'all just put out some, we didn't call it glyphosate, we called it Roundup. Didn't y'all put out some Roundup up in a couple of blocks up there in the Mineola Hills?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad, we did." He said, "And how long have they been out?" I said, "Oh, about 30 days. He said, "Let's ride up there and take a look at them." So we go up there and he's riding with me, and we go into first it was about a 20-year-old grapefruit grove set 30 by 30, that was normal back then, 48 trees to an acre. And we're easing along down one of the middles, and he says to me, he says, "Okay, tell me what you see." And I said, "Dad, man, look, all the weeds are dead. This is awesome. It killed the lantana and killed the guinea grass, everything dead." He said, "That's what you see?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, what do you see?" He said, "What about those 6, 7, 8 grapefruit laying on the ground?" This was like in September. Okay, so, the grapefruit have got decent size. They're not ready to harvest yet. And I said, "Oh, Dad, that's nothing." He said, "What do you mean that's nothing?" I said, "Well, we got a big boom on the tractor that goes under the tree and applies the herbicide." And I said, "More than likely the boom is what's knocking the fruit off because it's hanging down low on the limbs." And my dad said, "You really think so?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't you have another block right up here that's young grapefruit that you treated?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Let's ride up there and look at that." So we ease on down the road, go in there, and these are about, if I remember right, John, they were about 7 or 8 year old trees. Anyway, we're easing along. He said, "What do you see there?" I said, "Man, Dad, look at the weed control." Because, younger trees, you get a lot more sun on the ground and weeds are really rampant. And I said, "Man, look at that, what it's killed." He said, you see any grapefruit on the ground? I said, yeah, matter of fact. What do you see on your side? Well, 2 or 3 grapefruit per tree laying on the ground. He said, huh, boom, there's no fruit hanging down for the boom to hit because this is a young tree. So how do you explain that? I said, Dad, I don't know. He said, I'm going to tell you. He said, we have been lied to about glyphosate. He said, this chemical is absorbed through the trunk, it's absorbed through the leaves, it's absorbed through the roots. And he said, you watch, it's going to be a major disaster in this whole citrus industry of what it's going to create. Now, this was 1973, John.
Wow.
1973, when it first came out and was released here in for citrus, in Florida. And what little bit of citrus is left in the state right now, we still have major fruit drop, but not all, but the majority of the fruit drop is blamed on the disease, what we call greening, which that's true. It does create a fruit drop, but we have a few organic groves left in the state, and we do not have near the fruit drop as our neighbors do that are conventional, and they use glyphosate and we don't.
Taimur Malik is an innovator developing his own regenerative practices and systems in a desert environment in Pakistan where they don't have the same access to resources that we're privileged to have in many countries around the world. And Taimur has been an inspiration to many people for developing his own methods and giving us a vision for what is possible in very challenging ecosystems.
So I'll give you an example. The first time after we started doing more regenerative, these regenerative practices in earnest and the foliar applications and the compost applications, we got at least 50% yield bump in our sweetland crop.
Wow. There's this framing that you achieve what you incentivize. And we've been talking about the improved pest resistance, heat stress, flavor, aroma, etc. But what has just broadly with the various things that you've tried, what have the economic benefits been?
The economic benefits, I think it depends on from crop to crop, right? Obviously, it's been fantastic for chilies where, no pesticide usage. So you're doing this huge saving, you're getting a really good, very solid crop. It's led to other economic opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have happened because now, this big company that I mentioned is thinking of, working with us for us to expand our chili production and cater to their needs. So that's a great economic opportunity. Chilies, by the way, if you can do them well and get a good yield or, a very good yield, then a chili is probably the most economically lucrative crop in Pakistan today. Right, these dried red chilies specifically. So again, it's opened up this huge economic opportunity for us, which I hope we can capture. Now, again, with orchards, we are getting much better performance than under a conventional system we did before. So again, huge economic advantage, both from the point of view of not having to use synthetics, but also in terms of like pesticides or fungicides or herbicides, but also in terms of, the quality and yield specs. And what it's leading us to now that we have confidence and we've created a regenerative product, we are now seeking to launch a direct-to-consumer brand for our mangoes and our citrus, in which we can capture much higher value than taking it to the middlemen. So hitherto, we've been selling it to middlemen. But now that we've established this premium product, which I'm almost certain is also much better for customers to be, because we know that this stuff generally has much higher nutrient density, which at some point I hope we can get tested. But just from taste, aroma, all of that stuff, is an indicator that it is better for customers. But it's also better because we're not using pesticides, we're not using fungicides and herbicides, right? So that opportunity has additionally emerged because we've created a superior product that's free of these chemicals, and we hope the customer will then patronize because of these attributes. And in terms of the cane, we are seeing much better stress resistance. We are seeing slightly higher yields, but we are only at the beginning stages of our regenerative protocols. And I have, zero doubt that, a year from now, and especially 2 years from now, our yield specs are going to be so much better than the conventional cane that we used to grow and the conventional cane that our sister farms are growing in the same bioregion, just a few kilometers away.
I want to say thank you to all of our listeners, to all of the guests who have participated in the journey and people who've joined me on the podcast this year. I really enjoy having these conversations. I enjoy being able to share stories and for all of us to learn together. Everyone knows something that I would benefit from knowing, and I enjoy being able to draw that out. As we look ahead, agriculture at the moment is in a very difficult economic environment for many growers around the world, here in North America and globally. And there is so much opportunity. There has never been a better time to get into the regenerative agriculture space. There has never been a moment when the message of hope and opportunity that is communicated by the guests here on the podcast is more beneficial and more needful. So I ask that you please share the pieces that you find encouraging and hopeful and inspirational with other people in the agricultural community to share the joy and the opportunity with them as well. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for what you contribute. May you have an awesome growing season this coming year. EA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with you.